among you. I think Audrey has set a very beautiful tone for us this morning with that wonderful poem. When Audrey and I started talking about this service back, I think, in June, neither one of us knew how timely, as she said this morning, this particular theme would be for today. The reason I suggested it is that next Saturday is the International Day of Peace that the United Nations declared for all peoples to reflect on next Saturday, September 21st. And that declaration was in 1981, I believe. And ever since then, September 21st has been set aside by the United Nations for all peoples to reflect on peace. And in 1999, the General Assembly of the United Nations, following up that Declaration of Day of Peace, laid out some principles and ideas for what they called a culture of peace would look like. A culture of peace, namely attitudes, behavior throughout the world. And this is what they said. They said, recalling the Constitution of the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, which states that since wars begin in the minds of people, it is in the minds of people that the defenses of peace must be constructed. Very interesting statement for an international organization to make. Starts with the heart, not with the governments. Recalling further the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and other relevant international instruments of the United Nations system, recognizing that peace is not only is the absence of conflict, but also requires a positive, dynamic, participatory process where dialogue is encouraged and conflicts are solved in a spirit of mutual understanding and cooperation. Recognizing the need to eliminate all forms of discrimination and intolerance, including those based on race, color, sexual preference, language, religion, political or other opinion, national, ethnic, or social origin, property, disability, birth, or other status. A culture of peace is a set of values, attitudes, traditions, and modes of behavior and ways of life based on a respect for life, ending of violence, and the promotion and practice of nonviolence through education, dialogue, cooperation, full respect for the principles of sovereignty of all nations, territorial integrity and political independence of states, and non-intervention in matters which are essentially within the domestic jurisdiction of any state, in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations and international law. Full respect for promotion of human rights and fundamental freedoms, commitment to peaceful settlement of conflicts, efforts to meet the developmental and environmental needs of present and future generations, respect for and promotion of the right to development, respect for the promotion of equal rights and opportunities for women and men, respect and promotion of the right of everyone to freedom of expression, opinion, and information, adherence to the principles of freedom, justice, democracy, tolerance, solidarity, cooperation, pluralism, cultural diversity, dialogue and understanding at all levels of society and among nations, and fostered by an enabling national and international environment conducive to peace. Progress in the fuller development of a culture of peace comes about through values, attitudes, modes of behavior, and the ways of life conducive to the promotion of peace among individuals, groups, and nations. Now that's quite a description of a culture of peace. It's comprehensive. And interestingly enough, even though an international organization wrote this, it very much recognizes what the readings recognize today and what the children are talking about in that poem. That it begins with the individual. The United Nations cannot succeed unless individuals throughout the world really are living peaceful lives of respect, seeking justice, and trying through dialogue and cooperation to solve serious conflicts before they use force. I think that's very timely for us right now in the world. And the readings, very interestingly, all pick up on some of this. Thich Nhat Hanh is alive today. He is a Vietnamese Buddhist monk. He's living in France in exile. In the 1960s, he protested nonviolently the Vietnam War by engaging in sit-ins and nonviolent demonstrations in Saigon and in the north. He went to the north and tried nonviolent resistance. And he was arrested, and eventually he escaped, and now he continues to write about nonviolence. He believes in nonviolence. And as a Buddhist, he believes that all beings, no matter who they are, including your enemy, are living beings and deserve some respect. Compassion, he calls it. Lao Tzu, the Chinese sage who lived about 600 BC, lived at a time of terrible civil war. There were several hundred years of civil war in China, from about 800 BC to about 200 BC. And he lived right in the middle of it. And he was an elderly man, but he was a wise man. And he believed that peace has to be interconnected. You can't impose peace by an army. You have to start with the human heart, with the home, with the school, with society, with government, and then nations. And that's why he talks about these concentric circles. Confucius, his contemporary, believed the same thing, but Confucius made an effort to bring peace, and he started with those inner circles, the home and the school, and began to set up schools, education for people in China, rich and poor, to learn respect and to learn morality. And Gandhi, certainly in that reading, believes in the same things and talks about nonviolence in the world only being possible if we have nonviolence ourselves. I think so many people think, well, those leaders out there should bring peace. They should do this, they should do that. And don't think about the culture of disrespect that is emerging even in our own society. I want to put a couple of things on this chart for you to show you in graphic form what Confucius and Lao Tzu were talking about, and then a chart about our society today, so you can see it. Now, very clearly, Confucius and Lao Tzu, okay, move it back just a second. They're talking about it begins in the home, the family. Confucius taught that parents must respect each other, they must respect their children, children must listen to their parents and their elders, and that the culture of peace begins with a home that teaches respect. And then when the children, and this was his second circle, go to school, and he was setting up free schools, they will take those values out into the next circle and meet new people in the educational system and take what their parents have taught them to respect their peers and their teachers. So he sees that the home and the school are the first incubators of peace. And then he said, once that happens, his third circle was government. He felt that if it starts here and is practiced here, then when people go out as citizens, he spoke of a second nature that will have been inculcated by practicing respect here, that will be a second nature that then they will go and be able to deliberate with each other about society, and people in government will have that second nature to respect the people. He did not believe you get a strong army out here and you impose peace on that. That won't work. Now, let me put up what I think where we are in our American society. I think we accept much of this, but in our society it's a little more complicated. Okay? Let's see, can we just... All right, that's great, thanks. I'm terrible writing here, so bear with me, okay? I think we do believe that the home is extremely important. We value that. We value the family, the freedom of the family. We value education. There's no doubt about that. We're the most educated society in the world. And we believe that education is important so that young people, or people at whatever age, can continue to develop their mind. Now, we add a circle here. What we add here, and what our founding fathers add, was called civil society. We believed that, yes, we have government, okay, out here, but we believed that civil society, private life in society, is extremely important to keep government honest. In other words, you don't go from the school to government. You have a layer here in civil society. And civil society has many different dimensions that go beyond the home and the school that are not government. We certainly have the economy, do we not? We have private property. We have people being able to express themselves, gain support. We have politics, where you have political parties that compete for power and discuss issues on what government should do. And even parties out of power are discussing out here in order to gain power or to criticize you. There's a dialogue going on. We have over here interest groups, okay? All sorts of interest groups where private citizens form their own organizations. Many of them are voluntary organizations that do humanitarian work. Okay? And these groups also influence government, politics, and we have over here the media, which presumably is to report to people the truth about all of this and about this, and give us information. One of the readings today talked about the right to information. And we have religious groups, okay? All sorts. We pride ourselves as a nation in having all sorts of religious groups. Now, let me give my analysis here of the relationships of these groups today and why it makes it difficult to create a culture of peace. Theoretically, this all should work, because you have independent sources of ideas, influence, and so forth. When people are in their homes, they can listen to the media, they can join various different voluntary groups. Schools can listen to information, teach people the truth. And all of this then should influence government to act correctly with information and justly. Now here's our problem today. Now some of you may not agree with this, but this is my analysis, okay? If you look at this, it's not just. It simply isn't. If you've been reading reports within the last week, 1% of the American people now control 20% of the wealth. We have steadily, since the early 80s, moved to a more diverse, divided society economically. There's no doubt about that. The recovery is occurring slowly, but those who are benefiting the most are the ones who have money. Now, one of the problems is that this influences interest groups. People with money pay very high contributions to interest groups to represent them. So that many of those interest groups are far more powerful and influential with information, with money, with advertisements in the media, with paying for the campaigns of politicians, than other interest groups of like Habitat for Humanity, various different voluntary organizations that go out. These interests, if you watch what happened in Colorado last week, two people who were strong in the legislature for gun control there was a referendum, they got thrown out. The Koch brothers moved in with their money. Now, Mayor Bloomberg did too, to try to offset it, but it wasn't enough. There is lying that goes on, twisting of facts that goes on. And the thing is that if you look at the media and you look at talk radio and you look at, I'm sorry, Fox News, and sometimes MSNBC, but I think Fox News is far worse in distorting what's going on. And people in the home and in schools listen to the radio, watch these media, follow the blog. I have students at Ripon College who sometimes don't want to read the books I suggest because you're a liberal professor. I go to my blog. And God knows what they get off blogs. Freedom of information, that's great. But you see, money drives the system here. When the Supreme Court said, was it three years ago or 2 years ago, Citizens United, that corporations will have unlimited rights as individual citizens to pour money into political campaigns. That is just like pouring gasoline on the fire. And then you have who gets elected to government. You have to be an independent millionaire, or you have to have an awful lot of support from interest groups. One of the things that made it hard in the build-up on Syria when the president decided to go to Congress was, so many of them felt, if I vote a certain way, there will be someone further to the right of me who will be paid by an interest group to run against me in the next primary. They weren't thinking of Syria or the complexity of Syria, whether we should use military force. It's what's going to happen in the next election. As soon as a congressman gets elected today, they have to start thinking about the next campaign. That's money. Now, so in my analysis, one of the children that was a poem read over here was about let's stop the greed. Greed is driving the system. Greed is distorting the truth. And greed is, as we watch the debates going on in Congress and in the media, it's vicious, it's character assassination, and it isn't interested in the truth. It's interested in scaring people. Now, where are the moral voices to question this? Where are they? I am a practicing Roman Catholic. I listen to the Pope. Sometimes I agree with him, sometimes I don't. This new Pope I agree with a lot. This guy came out of poverty. This guy lived through a military dictatorship. There's a new book about him, how many lives he saved in Argentina during the Dirty War by getting them out of the country. He knows this very well. And he believes we need justice and we need peace. I went to Mass yesterday at St. Raphael's Church in Oshkosh, very progressive Catholic parish. They're doing a lot of good in the community. They have, a lively community. Silence. Absolute silence on Syria. Oh, we prayed for so-and-so who's had their 40th wedding anniversary. We prayed for so-and-so who's sick. Wonderful. Silence. Even the Catholic bishop sent a letter to Obama 10 days ago asking him not to use violence in Syria. You would think maybe that would be read in the church. Now, I use my own church as an example. Many other churches have their head in the sand. Not necessarily the leaders. I mean, I think the National Council of Churches, the board of the United Church of Christ, you've had statements in the last 2 weeks by these leaders, but they're not being read in the churches. They're afraid that if they raise anything about the moral dimensions of this, it will sound like politics. And we don't want to do politics in the church because it will upset people and we'll lose members. I've had students interview pastors in Ripon. I think I've told you this before. And that's what they told the students. I don't preach about justice in society because that's politics. They have lost the ability to apply moral values to society. Oh, they'll tell us that gay marriage is wrong. They'll tell us that abortion is wrong. They'll tell us that we're all sinners and we got to pray. And they stop. So where do we get hope? Now, what I find very interesting is that all of this white space here, us, sometimes can really make a difference. Public opinion in the United States has been very strong against using military force in Syria. And that public opinion has not been Democratic, Republican, old or young. It's been a cross-section of the American people who have said, we have tried this stuff before in Iraq and in Afghanistan, and it's very complex and it doesn't work easily, and there's tremendous blowback not only for us but for the people in the region. Let's go slow. So the hope is there is a lot of wisdom in the people, even if the groups that represent the people in civil society and the government are not doing it. Then you have the nations of the world. Let me add this final, the nations of the world out here that we deal with today. The Parliament in Britain said no. And that made Obama stop and think. Then Mr. Putin comes along. Communist. Presumably an atheist. Now, for your homework, I want you all to Google New York Times Putin op-ed. How many of you read it? Go home and read it. Now, Putin has his own interests. He does not want Assad to fall because Assad is an ally. The Russians are able to have a seaport in the Mediterranean because of Syria. Putin is very well aware that some of those chemical weapons might seep into the hands of terrorists who will then come and fight in the Caucasus in Russia, and he's concerned about militant Muslim extremists in his area. So he has his own interests. But he proposed a peace solution. And when you read his op-ed, through the media, we've heard some very critical things about that op-ed. But when you read it, it makes a lot of sense. He talks about the complicated use of military force in the Middle East and the unforeseen consequences that this can have. He talks about the U.S. making mistakes in Iraq and Afghanistan and what it's cost us. He's talked about the growing presence of Al-Qaeda. 30,000 young Muslim men and women have streamed into Syria to fight Assad, but they want an Islamic State. And they are no friends of the Russians or of us. And he says, this is very complicated. And he says, we should follow the Charter of the United Nations and try to find a peaceful solution. Now you say, well, he's always vetoed things in the past. All right, but let's say what he's saying. Let's try something, and he's offered to work with the United States, and they signed an agreement in Geneva 2 days ago, and he's pressuring Assad to follow it, to allow international inspectors from the UN to go in, to see where the weapons are, and to begin to take those chemical weapons out. Russia has the ability to destroy them, as we do. Russia's closest. They'll probably go to Russia, and over several months they would be destroyed. Now, is that going to bring peace to Syria? Not necessarily. There's a serious civil war there. But it's going to put a control on chemical weapons. Why are so many Americans upset? Oh, my students tell me, he's going to get the credit and so forth. He's making our president look weak. He has put something on the table for international peace. And I tell students that it's the outcome that's important, even if the motive of the person who's proposing it isn't totally what we would like. If the consequences to save life give peace a chance, maybe it won't work, but we always have the resort of having more support if we have to make a strike, more support from other nations because we have in good faith tried to negotiate. And what really got the media upset was in this last paragraph, he talks about God. And he says, President Obama last Tuesday in his speech referred to the exceptional responsibility of the United States since we're different. And he said that's a dangerous thing for any nation to say today. Because we are all in an international community, rich nations and poor nations, we are all children of God. And we should all pray for peace. The right-wing media went bananas. But I want you to read that. Because that is a sane proposal. Our Secretary of State and President are going to try to use it. And it came from a number of things. The white spaces here in our country saying no. The British saying no. Russia realizing this is extremely complicated, not just for the United States, but for the whole Middle East. Let's try to work together. Why not try it? Why not give it a chance? Now, we still have the problem back here of the economy, the interest groups, the viciousness on the media. What Putin said was, at the end of his article, if we are able, the United States and Russia and the United Nations, to achieve the dismantling of chemical weapons in Syria, maybe this will open the door to more negotiations. There's a lot of sanity in that. A lot of sanity in that. Maybe the fact that the American people have said no to this group, to this group, to this group, to our politicians, maybe we will have more of these other interest groups saying no, demonstrations, nonviolent demonstrations. I would hope that local religious communities would begin to listen to their national, international leaders and maybe read their statements on Sunday or Saturday in their churches. That would help. But I think there's a moment of hope. So I don't see this in this dark and pessimistic way as I saw it 2 weeks ago. Last Friday, I had Father Wally Kasabuski in my class. He's the priest from Ripon who works in Panama. And we go down to help him every January build a dam. And he addressed my class, and he talked a lot about this. And he said, you know, this is pretty bad. And one student put up his hand. He said, yes, but the American people are good. The American people have decency. The American people want peace. And he said, thank you for saying that. He said, that gives me hope. He said, I'm concerned about our government, about people who have so much money that want to control the system. But he said, you're right, there is a decency here. And there's a decency out here that we must reach out to and find. And it doesn't mean that if you have conflicts with Russia on a number of issues, it doesn't mean that there aren't other issues where we can't cooperate. That's the whole purpose of the United Nations. It doesn't say we'll have one world government and everybody will see things the same, but that we'll sit down and talk to each other and find sometimes that there are some common ground we can work towards. But we have to fight the hate stuff in the media. We have to try to get the best information we can. And I think that means going to public television, listening to the BBC news reports, finding other sources of information besides just the usual ones, and talk to one another. See, education doesn't stop with high school or college. It's continuing. And we all need to educate ourselves and talk to each other. So I hope this is a moment. It's interesting, this morning on Meet the Press, and I'll stop with this. Meet the Press this morning was discussing this whole thing, and there are a couple of people who are identified with conservative movements, so forth. Say, oh, the president looks weak, the president is wishy-washy, he's losing his credibility in the world. Yeah, this has been messy the last 2 weeks. There's no doubt about that. But Bob Woodward of Washington Post said, wait a minute. Nobody has had a clear answer on what to do on this 2 weeks ago. And the fact that the president paused, maybe lurched this way, lurched that way, at least it bought some time. And if the consequence of all of this is some sort of international peace agreement, that's the important thing. Not to dump on the president. Yes, probably he did look weak. But you know, that's because this is so complex. We had a president in 2003 who didn't look weak at all. He's going to do this, bing, you know, in and out. It got us into a lot of trouble. Sometimes reflection, pausing, is not a sign of weakness, but a sign of wisdom. But we have to speak up to offset those other things and speak up as citizens with one another. I know I'm preaching to the choir here. I know most of you feel this way. Go talk to your neighbors. Go talk to people in other churches and say, is your pastor talking about this? Has your church leaders spoken about the Syria crisis? Find out about that. Tell them to go Google. Many church leaders at the leadership level have spoken, but the local pastors haven't. Tell them to go to church and ask, why aren't they hearing this in church? I mean, these are things we can do to educate people without hating people and shouting at them. What do you think? Does it make sense?
Ready for a response?
Yeah, ready. Respond.
Okay.
Go ahead. Fire away.